Hi, I'm just going to be doing a hopefully quick review upon the General Learning Outcome 3 for Biological Level of Analysis, and I will be doing it at the 22 mark level. So here is a disclaimer before I start the video. Please pause the video and read it. And yep, let's get into it. So basically there is a bunch of research methods that experimenters or researchers can use, and here's just a quick list of a few. And so basically the GLO 3, this is the question: discuss how and why particular research methods are used at the biological level of analysis. Now we always need to pay attention to the command term, and here it is discuss, and that means offer a balanced and considered review that includes a range of arguments, factors or hypotheses. Well, let's jump straight into the introduction, and what I always do is I get the command term and then I just add the question at the end. So what my beginning sentence would be: this essay offers a balanced and considered review that includes a range of arguments, factors or hypotheses that will explain how and why particular research methods are used at the biological level of analysis. That's a great way to start your essay. Always just start with a command term, and some people also like to end with it, so that's a good idea as well. Basically I'm just going to write down dot points of what I've written in my 22 marks. So the next thing I went on to, sorry about that, is that there are various methods that researchers and psychologists can use to carry out experiments or observations, just different research methods, and researchers must have a distinct method before conducting research and collecting and analyzing data. I then went on to define research methods, and I said that research methods are ways that researchers use and manipulate data to conduct their studies. And I said that there are 6 main research methods, and these include experiments, observational studies, surveys or questionnaires, case studies, interviews and correlational studies. You have to talk about biases because that is something very important in research. So basically in psychological research there can be biases present. I'm sure you've heard of this. These may influence the findings of the experiment, and mostly in a negative nature because they do affect the experiment. And the 2 main types of biases are researcher bias and observer bias. Researcher bias is basically when the researcher knows the true aim of the experiment, and they kind of dodge in demand characteristics to specifically change how the participant will act. This is demonstrated accurately in Loftus and Palmer 1974. And observer bias is when the participant knows the true aims of the experiment and they act accordingly. And this is often reasons why deception is used and informed consent can't be fully given. You have to say why research methods are used, and they are used to justify theories, for example localization, which was supported by McGuire et al. In 2000 with a quasi-experiment. And then I go on to relate back to the question about the biological level of analysis, and the most used methods at the biological level of analysis are most definitely experiments and case studies. So we would be talking about them too, and then we link the sentence to the next paragraph. These will be further analysed in the body of the essay, looking at studies and how and why these research methods are used. These referring to experiments and case studies. So basically experiments, this is another paragraph. So all of these boxes, excluding that one, this one and this one, these are just paragraphs that I've written. And so experiments, there are 3 types, and first I will go on to define experiments or say why they are used. and they are used to investigate a relationship between multiple variables within a controlled environment. There are 3 types of experiments: laboratory, field, and quasi, also known as natural. And lab experiments are in a laboratory setting, of course, and they establish a cause and effect. Their IV is randomly allocated and DV is measured, IV being independent variable and DV being dependent. And the researchers attempt to control as many extraneous variables. Now, a field experiment has a problematic cause and effect because sometimes it is not always achievable due to the real-life setting. The IV is still randomly allocated, or researchers try to, but they cannot control extraneous variables due to the real-life setting. And quasi-experiments, there is no cause and effect, although there will be an exception in the study that I will be using for this 22 mark for McGuire et al. But predominantly there is no cause and effect established. The IV naturally occurs, and the researchers attempt to control as many extraneous variables, and it is in a real-life setting. Then I go on to say why experiments are used at the biological level for analysis, and this is because it is the most scientific research methods, because it follows a chronological order, and it also most of the time establishes a cause and effect relationship. Now, the first key study that I will be doing is Rosenwig and Bennett, 1972, and that will be an example of a lab experiment. Now, I just covered this in my previous video for General Learning Outcome 1 and 2, so I will not be going over that again, but I will link you here, just about here, right there, a link to the other video and the time where I actually explain it. I'll go over it here so you can pause the video and just see it. Now, for the next paragraph, I evaluate the study first, and then I evaluate the general lab experiment, quasi, etc. So for the study, the strengths were there was a cause and effect established, it was replicable, it was supported by further studies, but limitations were animals limit ability to generalize to humans, and ethical considerations were present, like there was bad, but it was justified, and these are just general lab experiment evaluation that you need to include. And because I did study a specific study, I need to specifically provide some examples. So the cause and effect was between enrichment and changes in cerebral cortex, and if you mention cause and effect, you always need to mention what it was between, so that is very important. And it was supported by further studies, for example McGuire et al. 2000, and this provides a great link into our next study, which would be McGuire et al. And animals limit ability to generalize humans, but it does provide insight. And the ethical consideration was protection from harm of participants because they sacrificed a large amount of rats, but it was justified due to the experiment needed to carry out to identify the result of different environments. For example, what would happen if we were in an enriched environment during adolescence, etc. The second key study I chose was a field experiment, and that is done by Hoffling in 1996. So the aim of that was, there wasn't really an aim, but if you follow my trend, I always add a statement at the start of the study in pink. And what I said was that Hoffling in 1966 created a more realistic study of obedience than Milgram's study in 1963, which was 3 years prior. Now the method he used was, there was 22 real night nurses, and Dr. Smith, an actor, he wasn't really a doctor, he phoned nurses and he told them to administer 20 milligrams of a placebo drug called Astrotin. Now the maximum dosage, which was written on the bottle, was 10 milligrams, and that drug Astrotin was actually a harmless sugar pill invented just for the experiment, but nurses believed it was a real drug. And if they chose to carry out and give that drug, then broke 3 hospital rules. Now the results were that 21 out of 22 nurses actually administered the drug, and they broke all 3 hospital rules. When it was discussed with other nurses that did not participate in that observation, they all said that they would not comply with the order. And this was used as a control group. And it was concluded that Hoffling demonstrated that people are very unwilling to question supposed authority, even though they might have a good reason to. And the evaluation was that it had high ecological validity, but it broke ethical guidelines, for example, deception and informed consent. And this is just a general evaluation of field experiments. And it had high ecological validity because it was conducted in a real-life environment, the hospital, and deception because the doctor was not real, and informed consent was not obtainable because nurses were unaware that they were being watched. Now, the quasi-experiment is McGuire et al. 2000, and I've actually already done a video to this. It was a stop motion. I will link you to it right here, but I'm running out of time, so I cannot cover it. But you can also, where is it? You can also just screenshot, just pause the video and read this through. These are my notes for McGuire et al. Now, McGuire provided evidence and it had high ecological validity. There was a lack of control over variables though, and this is a general evaluation of quasi-experiments. It provided evidence that environment had an effect of neuroplasticity, and it was the everyday environment for taxi drivers, so it had high ecological validity, and how long participants have been taxi drivers for was not being able to be controlled by researchers. Now, case studies is an alternative method which researchers use at the biological level of analysis, and they are used to obtain data from a rare physiological phenomena. Case studies can be defined as an in-depth study of an individual or group which can show cumulative changes over time. This is just some information you might want to include in your paragraph to show detailed knowledge. Examples of case studies are David Reimer, investigated by Money 1974, it was Dr. Money, Patient HM, Milner 1957, and Clive Waring 1985, who we will be talking about. So basically, I go on to say the summary, the strengths and the limitations. So Clive Waring was a talented musician who contracted herpes encephalitis, which resulted in extensive brain damage to the hippocampus, affecting his long-term memory. His procedural memory was preserved. For example, playing the piano, you must include examples, but his declarative memory was impaired, with very little semantic and episodic memory, only remembering highlights of his life, for example, dancing with the Pope when he was younger. That resulted in him being diagnosed with amnesia, anterograde and retrograde, thus unable to make new memories. So basically the evaluation of the specific study were that it was ethically sound due to informed consent and protection from harm. And next of kin, Deborah, his wife, gave consent, and he himself gave consent during the short-term memory he had, and he was protected from harm because researchers would leave if Clive Waring felt uncomfortable. and limitations were that it was a longitudinal study, so there was researcher bias, and Wilson could have gotten close to the patient. So basically this is the general evaluation of the case study and conclusion.